Welcome back to the show. We've had amazing interviews all night long. And our next interview is Dr. Stephen Greer. We're going to get him on the line right now. And just to give you a little bio, if you don't know who Dr. Stephen Greer is, he's the founder of the Disclosure Project, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that's CSETI, and also the Orion Project. We're going to talk about all of that on the show tonight, as well as we're going to get into his new feature movie that he's coming out with called Sirius. And some more on Dr. Greer. He is the father of the Disclosure Movement. He presided over the groundbreaking National Press Club disclosure event in May 2001 that Adam Apollo earlier talked about. Over 20 military, government, intelligent, and corporate witnesses presented there, talking about their compelling testimony regarding the existence of extraterrestrial life forms existing on the planet and the reverse engineering of the energy and propulsion systems of these craft. We've been talking about that for a long time on the show, talking about reverse engineering of the UFOs like Roswell, which for all the listeners out there that don't know, the government did release the press release that talked about they did recover 3 ET bodies and a craft in Roswell. It's up on the government's website in a section called The Vault, where they put out all the top secret documents that they released to the public. So if you're not aware that the government did admit ETs do exist and they have 3 ET bodies at least from that crash alone, check out the government website. It's on there in the section called thevault.gov. Over 1 billion people heard the press conference through the original webcast and on a subsequent media coverage on BBC, CNN, CNN Worldwide, Voice of America, Pravda, Chinese media, and media outlets throughout Latin America. The webcast had 250,000 people waiting online, the largest webcast in the history of the National Press Club at the time. He's also a lifetime member of Alpha Omega Alpha Club, the nation's most prestigious medical honorary society. Dr. Greer has now retired as an emergency physician to work with CSETI, the Disclosure Project, and the Orion Project, which he is busy 24/7, like the rest of us light workers out there, doing what he can to raise awareness. During part of his career, he was chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Caldwell Memorial Hospital in North Carolina. He is also an author of 4 insightful books and multimedia DVDs on UFO ET subject. He teaches groups throughout the world how to make peaceful contact with extraterrestrial civilizations and continues to research bringing truly alternative energy sources out to the public. Now, I have seen lots of videos and all sorts of stuff. Dr. Greer and his team has got it down to almost a science, I would say, of using certain lights, lasers to call in ET craft UFOs. Again, this is not new news to myself and others and maybe some of the listeners out there, but this is all stuff you could research yourself online, on the internet, on YouTube, whatever it is, whatever your outlet is, to research this stuff we talk about and find it out for truth for yourself. Again, the government released the document that said they got 3 ET bodies in a craft at Roswell. NASA last year talked about how their Einstein time-space experiment concluded that there is a 4th dimensional vortex around the planet, a time-space vortex, which is proof that there is multi-dimensional dimensions, meaning that we're multi-dimensional beings, that there's other levels of existence, not just this linear timeline that we're living on now. This is put out by NASA, the government, and of course one of my other favorite articles put out last year by the head archaeologist in Egypt, which I mentioned earlier, went on national TV in Cairo, talked about that the pyramids were not just built by humans. So this news, this information is out there, and Stephen Greer is also one of the head pioneers of all of this. He's been seen and heard by millions worldwide. Hold on right there. When we come back, we are joined by Dr. Stephen Greer. So get ready for an amazing interview. We'll be right back. Here's some Adam Apollo. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Starseed Energy Radio. And now joining us on the show is the man himself, Dr. Stephen Greer. I just went over his bio before we went to break, so I'm not going to repeat it because it's pretty extensive. But Dr. Greer has been seen and heard by millions worldwide on CBS, BBC, Discovery Channel, History Channel, and throughout many, many, many other news outlets. And with that, Dr. Greer, thank you for coming on the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So let's start with a little history of Dr. Greer, because you have so much on your resume and so many projects you've been involved in. For all the new listeners out there, let's first start off by talking about how you first got started in the ET intelligence community and how you started pushing the Disclosure Project.
Well, that's a very long story, and I have an autobiography called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, that you can get at Amazon.com. It's actually in about 8 or 9 languages. And, my interest in this began when I was a child, growing up there in North Carolina. My uncle, as you may know, was the senior project engineer that designed the lunar module that put the first man on the moon. He was with Grumman, which became Northrop Grumman. And around that time, when he was working on that project, I had an encounter and a sighting of an ET craft at close range. And I became interested ever since then. Now, of course, many things happened in between. I became a meditation instructor, and then I went to medical college, and then became an emergency doctor and raised 4 kids. And so, but in the course of around 1990, living there in Asheville, North Carolina, I had a series of experiences and contact events that happened that convinced me I needed to start a project that would really move this subject forward. So I formed the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, dscti.org, and our objective was to make peaceful contact with these civilizations since the government had completely dropped the ball on this issue. And within a year or two, we had amazing contact events. And about that time, of course, the former head of Army Intelligence and a bunch of other people approached me and said, in so many words, what the hell do you think you're doing? And I told them what we were going to do and that we were going to end the cover-up and bring this information out. And one thing led to another, and that, by the time Clinton became president, I was the guy that his CIA director brought in to give him a 3-hour briefing on the subject. So it was a very steep climb from sort of taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and heart attacks in an emergency department to doing this. And the Disclosure Project, if you go to disclosureproject.org, you'll see that we've now identified over 500 military and corporate and CIA folks who dealt with this issue and brought out a great many of their testimony and evidence. But that was not the initial impetus. The original impetus was for us to have a citizen diplomacy effort to make peaceful contact with these civilizations because they're here, we're here, and there's no one taking care of the relationship, the sort of embryonic relationship between humanity and these civilizations in a way that was non-militarized and not paranoid and frankly stupid. So the whole emphasis behind what we're doing was really based on this concept that these civilizations have been here a very long time. They're obviously increasing their presence around the Earth because of the transitional time we're in, and that the mainstream government had completely mismanaged the issue since the 50s. And most people don't realize that, the reason Eisenhower said beware of the military-industrial complex is because he had been stiff-armed out of this issue back in around 1955 to 59. And as a result, he became quite despairing at the end of his life about the fact that the military-industrial complex had hijacked this issue and left a lot of our leaders out of the loop and had taken this whole matter in a direction that is frankly very, very disastrous and dangerous, and we can get into that. But not the least of which is the fact that no one's taking care of the relationship. And number two, that the science and technology end of it, which is the heart of the secrecy, has been kept so ruthlessly under wraps that we're now facing sort of an existential threat to life on this planet because the technologies that should have come out many decades ago have been kept secret, and many people, I'm right here in And I'm thinking, most of the people in this city have no idea what's going on at Lockheed Martin and Northrop and SAIC and these large contracting corporations that really run these projects. And the least of the people who find out are the president and the people in the Congress. And most folks don't understand that the secrecy around this issue has a couple of sort of motivations behind it. But a big one is the fact that anyone who's ever seen one of these objects knows that they're not using a fossil fuel or a rocket to move around. They're not using Exxon Jet A fuel, which means that the science behind these so-called UFOs, which have been studied now for many, many decades, would completely take this civilization off of fossil fuels and nuclear power and environmental destruction. And that's a good thing for humanity. But for the 200 or 300 corporations and individuals that control over half of the net worth of the world, we're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars, this is not good news because they make their money off of all of us being slaves and addicts to their macroeconomic klepto-fascist order. So this is really a big issue, and it's not what most people think. Most people think it's about little gray men or little green men. It's really about the human condition and the kinds of changes that have to happen within our hearts and our spirits and our minds and our actions so that we move on to a whole new civilization.
Absolutely. And when you talk about visitations or sightings, there's record numbers of people reporting this. You're talking in the millions of people that have reported seeing UFOs, that have had contact, and talking about Washington D.C. There's so much technology there, and going back to ancient technology where there's batteries and light bulbs in the pyramids. I mean, they had this technology
there's a lot more than that. There's a man who does contract work through IT&T for the CIA that I know him very intimately, and he's stayed at my home, and he is routinely given artifacts that are thousands to hundreds of thousands of years old or older.
Wow.
That are very high tech, and basically he's given these things to study how they operate and what they might have done. So it's a myth that this is a new phenomenon. What's new about it, which people need to understand, is that the modern era of sightings and events coincided with the dawn of the nuclear age and atomic weapons, and that it's quite clear that while I don't think there's any evidence at all that these civilizations are hostile to us, but it's quite clear they're rather concerned about our hostility because we certainly have developed the means to destroy life on Earth, which would be a cosmic tragedy of the greatest proportions. So I think that when you look at this in a dispassionate and objective way, the modern era that began in the 40s and 50s with the so-called Roswell event and other events, this was mainly because there were civilizations out there who've been watching us for a very long time. And we went from, I tell people this story there in North Carolina, my grandmother being born in the late 1800s, riding around in horses and buggies. And then her son, my uncle, designs the lunar module that puts the first man on the moon. So, this kind of development, on the one hand, is wonderful, but because the energy and propulsion component of what's been discovered all the way back to Nikola Tesla and before in the early 1900s and late 19th century, even the late 1800s, these things have been kept secret because whether it's at the early days, the Rockefeller and oil cartels, or the modern days, the macroeconomic, Goldman Sachs, government Sachs cartels, these folks simply do not want this information out because it is such a massive transformation of geopolitical and macroeconomic power. And ultimately, these things get very quickly reduced to these struggles over power, who has it, who doesn't, and who's running the planet. And I think that this is something most people never think about when they think of UFOs and ETs. But the secrecy is born out of that. And one of the things, I tell people this sort of a tragic but hilarious story of, I'm preparing, here I am in my 30s, preparing to brief a sitting CIA director, Clinton's first CIA director, R. James Woolsey, on this subject. And it's December of 1993. The president's only been in power for less than a year. He's made inquiries into the subject and has been denied access. And I'm told this directly with people who spend the night at the White House and know about this. And the CIA director had pointed out in the introduction, other dimensions have been developed for decades, and yet they have been ruthlessly classified and kept secret. And the result of that is that we're, of course, destroying the environment, and we're in oil war number 18 in the Middle East. And, we're on this sort of juggernaut towards oblivion when the solutions are fixed on already. So this is what we have to do. We have to really bring this information out.
And Dr. Greer, hold on one second. We got to take a quick break, and we'll pick up right where you left off. Hold on one second. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the show. You're listening to Starseed Energy Radio. We're joined by Dr. Stephen Greer, and we're talking about the Disclosure Project and ET intelligence. And it's amazing that you've had now Dr. Greer, over 500 people come forward and talking about people like Robert Dean, the NATO intelligence analysis, and Sergeant Clifford Stone. You even had the Japanese princess go on national TV at the beginning of the year and talk about ET disclosure. So it's amazing that people are finally coming forward and comfortable and talking about this subject and really leading the way with people. And also what I like to tell people on the show is people need to realize that it's not these ETs that we're talking about. They're not these poster child grays, that these are beautiful beings, beautiful people that look like us, that talk like us, and there's beautiful people on those crafts, right?
Well, there are people from many different star systems, but they're certainly all very developed, and there's certainly every one of them more evolved than anyone on planet Earth are, frankly. The one thing that people need to understand is that many of the things that are reported as ET or not. And this gets into a very complex discussion of counterintelligence operations. But beginning back in the 50s and 60s, it was decided to basically host a great many of these events using man-made anti-gravity type craft, as well as so-called programmed life forms. These are things that look like so-called grays or what have you. They're not ET at all. They're very much man-made, and I know scientists personally who've worked on them and physicists who've worked on them. So this subject is filled with myth and disinformation, which is what you would expect. I mean, if you look at a memo from Canada from 1951, the Wilbur Smith memo, it says very directly that at this point in history, and this was the year before we detonated the first nuclear weapon of hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll, this top-secret Canadian document states categorically that this subject was the most classified matter in the U.S. government and exceeded the secrecy surrounding the development of the hydrogen bomb. And I'm almost quoting directly from that document. So what people have to understand is that, there are various agendas out there, all of which redound to the benefit of the military-industrial and macroeconomic order that's destroying the planet. It has nothing to do with the truth. And so I tell people to be very careful. There's a lot of nonsense out there. And actually the truth is more beautiful and also simpler. And that is, if you have the ability to travel at multiples of the speed of light through other dimensions, which is what they're doing, to get from one star system to this star system, you have developed a level of consciousness that precludes the level of stupid war-making hostility that we see here. So the movie Star Wars and all those wonderful things put aside for a moment, they're great fantasies for people who wish to indulge them. But that Manichaean view of the universe is simply not found. There is a universal order, if you want to call it that. Civilizations such as our own that are still very primitive and making war and killing each other are simply quarantined and not allowed to leave their star system. And that's, frankly, what we've encountered. When we landed on the moon, Timothy Good reported in Above Top Secret that Neil Armstrong was overheard saying, and I can confirm this is what happened, that the crater where we landed was crowded with extraterrestrial vehicles, and they were basically warning us not to continue our space exploration until we could millions and millions of its own people in organized warfare. In the last century, we've killed something close to 200 million people, which would be the population of an entire planet. Through organized murder, which is what we call war, this is something which civilizations that are at this level of development simply will not tolerate in terms of allowing us to go out in space. Now, I think this gets into a larger question, is that, therefore, if they're here and they're wanting to make some degree of contact with humans, who should be making that contact? Should it be basically hijacked by military and corporate folks who looked at the world through war-colored glasses, or should it be people who are of goodwill and are spiritually enlightened and are wanting the best for humanity, et cetera? And some years ago, I was with Senator Claiborne Pell, and those of us like myself who were raised without any money and went to college on Pell grants, you can thank Claiborne Pell for that. And Senator Pell and I were out in California. I was doing a briefing for the Board of Noetic Sciences, and we were on a ranch next to the Skywalker Ranch of George Lucas's place out there near San Rafael. And we were out under the stars, and I looked at him and I said, Senator, you were the chairman, or are at the time, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the U.S. Senate, the most powerful government in the world, and you've been denied the responsibility and the sacred obligation of dealing with the ultimate foreign relations issue. And I pointed to the stars above our head, and he looked at me with his horn-rimmed glasses and went, well, Dr. Greer, I'm afraid you may be right. And I said, well, I am. And I said, this is a tragedy. I said, we have got to stop this hijacking of these important issues by kleptocrats and crypto-fascists, who really are misanthropic money whores and who have really no interest in the welfare of the earth and humanity. There are very good people out there in the world, as you've mentioned, who come forward. And what's very heartening to see is in the last decade, since we did the big National Press Club event here in Washington, and brought forth...
Dr. Greer, we got to take a quick break. We're out of time, but hold on right there. We'll take a quick break, and we'll pick up right where you left off.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
All right, welcome back to the show. You're listening to Starseed Energy Radio, and we are joined by Dr. Stephen Greer, head of the Disclosure Project and the Orion Project, now the new movie series that he's coming out with. And right before we went to break, Dr. Greer, you're talking about how you're with the congressman and looking up at the stars and talking about how even him himself is being withheld all this information. And let's jump into some of the new technologies, reverse engineering, that has been withheld from the population, from civilization.
Well, what people need to understand is that beginning in the mid-40s, and actually this work began in Germany under Hitler, there were anti-gravity devices developed. And in fact, the early experiment in lifter systems, as they're called, these are systems that cause a mass reduction to things float to a lift, were dating back to the 1920s with T. Townsend Brown and the Pulaski-Frost experiment. And a lot of this information is at the OrionProject.org. What people have to understand is that the laws of the universe are universal. So humans have uncovered many of these on their own. That pathway was potentiated or augmented by the downing, unfortunately, by electromagnetic weapons of extraterrestrial vehicles that began in the late 40s, the most famous of which is the Roswell event, but there have been many dozens of such events. And studying that technology from those craft augmented what was already being developed but still classified. You have to understand that there are classified programs and documents from the late 1800s and early 1900s that are still to this day secret. So, and that is a fact you can look up, in the government. What people have to understand also is that when we look at how this technology has evolved, that we have now more than 50 or 60 years of trillions of dollars that have gone into research and development funded by taxpayers. But those have been kept classified and have not yet benefited the human race. And that is a crime against not only humanity but the earth. So this is a really substantial issue. The other point is that one of the areas of research has been the interface between thought and consciousness and electromagnetic devices. And almost everyone who studied this issue, and I remember talking to a senior McDonnell Douglas aerospace scientist back when I first started the project, who was asked by old man McDonnell himself to look into this, that these civilizations that travel through the stars are using technologies that are scientific, and their devices that they interface with a type of coherent thought as clearly as you and I are talking on a telephone at the speed of light. And what people have to understand, the implications of that are enormous in terms of contact. And when I learned this from my own contact experiences that began when I was 18 up in the mountains of North Carolina, what I discovered was that humans can learn meditation techniques that connect them to this expanded cosmic level of mind, and then do a series of protocols. I call it coherent thought sequencing. It's basically thought turned into a laser that interface with these communication devices on these extraterrestrial craft and their innate capabilities, which are highly telepathic. And this gets into how we started what I call the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, which is a citizens diplomacy effort where we train people to go around the world. But this is one of the crown jewels of the secrecy that the CIA and other folks don't want to talk about, because it absolutely upends the entire reductionist, materialist, modern scientific paradigm and adds to it this complex trans-dimensional view of reality that includes everything that's folded within us. You know, I'm reminded of this ancient Sufi saying that's a rhetorical question, and it says, thinkest thyself a puny form when within the universe is folded. So that the entirety of the cosmos is folded within every individual like a quantum conscious hologram. And there are ways to access that conscious quantum hologram. And this is something which both Orthodox science and Orthodox religion don't want you to know, because this is something that would change our civilization forever.
Yeah, when you talk about these the ships, from what I understand, a lot of them are organic. They have a consciousness. They have their own Merkaba fields around them. These highly advanced, multidimensional ships, and that consciousness is absolutely accessed through meditation and other ways like that, of a form of movement even. So let's jump into your newest project, or one of your newest projects, which is your new featured film that you're coming out with. Tell us about that.
Well, this came about almost by accident. In November, about 6 or 7 months ago, an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker named Armadeep Kalika, who had made the movie Jacob's Turn and won an Emmy for that, approached me, one who was very interested in what we were doing. And we came up with the idea of crowdfunding through Kickstarter and also another site, Sirius.neverendinglight.com. And by the way, Sirius is spelled S-I-R-I-U-S, like the star system, .neverendinglight.com. And we decided to let the public see if they wanted to make this film. So we set as sort of a minimum goal, $250,000, which is not a lot to make a 2-hour feature film. I mean, most people spend $100 million on the latest junky thing from Tom Cruise and whatnot. But we decided, let's do something that we know we can do, that would be a feature film documentary that would tell this whole story of the science of consciousness, the Disclosure Project, these new technologies, and a vision of the future with all of this information coming out. And so actually we're getting very close to our goal, and people who want to help us, you can, make a contribution at Sirius.neverendinglight.com, and you'll get some incentives. It depends on how much you donate, but it includes even coming to the premiere and, Hollywood and what have you. But what's exciting about it is that, in the history of doing this in Hollywood, we're in the top 10% of films that have ever been funded by just the masses giving small donations. And so really created a buzz. So in the last 60 days, we went from zero to now $240,000. So I think that what people are realizing is that if we do it this way, instead of letting the big studios do it and the big mainstream media outlets do it, we can actually tell the truth and get the entire truth out to the public without it being watered down with nonsense. And that's what we're going to do with this 2-hour film. And, it's an experiment. We'll see how far it goes. The Disclosure Project was a citizens' effort. It was all self-funded with donations, and, all the military people who came forward did so without payment, and because they knew it was time to end the secrecy on this issue. So it's really an experiment in the sense of the greatest form of democracy, and that is people doing what they believe in. But this film, if it does well, let's look at Michael Moore's first film, Roger and Me, eventually grossed $300 million. If this film can be done well, that's why we really want to raise more like 300 or 400, but we have a minimum of 250, is that we could put this out virally so that people could download it. And if it was just a very small amount, if millions of people did that, we'd have the funds to open our own scientific laboratory to bring out these technologies, because it is not going to happen through the Department of Energy. We've met with those guys. It is not going to happen through General Motors or Exxon or Lockheed. It isn't going to happen unless the people find a way to do it in a modest way, but in an effective way. So our goal is that this film will not only educate 1 billion or 2 billion people by the time we can make it go viral, but it will also create the means for us to open a research and development lab where the brilliant scientists we've identified over the last decade could be put together in a secure way and bring these technologies out with the whole world watching. Because if you do it secretively, Jonah, the problem is it's going to get confiscated. The Federation of American Scientists came out about a year and a half ago with a report, and there's a mainstream scientific group, and their national security project, headed by Stephen Aftergood, came out and said that there were 5,135 patents that have been seized under the National Security Act, and there are many others that have had national security orders placed on them. And this is a scandal where many of these are these sort of quote-unquote free energy and other type devices that would get us off oil. And there are people who are bureaucrats working not for the people of the United States, but for these corrupting financial interests that are abusing their power and suppressing these technologies. And this is going to have to stop. The only way it's going to happen is that if the people get behind it and say, all right, we've had enough. Enough is enough. And it's time to bring not only this information out, make peaceful contact, but also bring out the technologies and sciences that could liberate the world and start an entirely new, transformed civilization on Earth. This is the time to do it, and if not now, when? And if not, who? So it's one of these things where the film really we're hoping will be sort of the thing that will be the impetus to move, making all these other things advance very quickly.
This is something I personally came up with myself in a realization, like people like yourself or David Icke and all the people that are talking truth, coming from a heart space, I feel, is my opinion, are protected by our higher level of consciousness, by our galactic family, whatever you want to call it, because you're speaking truth from a heart space. And that was an example for people like myself that do a radio show like this, that put out information of truth to awaken the masses to a higher way of being. And it's amazing. It's amazing when you come from that. So that's a very important piece that you said, which is don't hold this stuff into secrecy, because that is not absolutely going to work. And we have about 5 minutes left, Dr. Greer. So if you can, talk a little bit about some things that we could do, the people, to get more involved with CSETI, with the movie. I mean, anything you think is pertinent for people, just regular people that are listening to the show, to get involved, to help with the disclosure process.
Well, if everyone listening to your show right now went to Sirius.neverendinglight.com, and there's the category for $11 where you actually get to stream a copy of the film when we finish it. That would put us so over the top. We could make something amazing. That's one thing anyone can do. I mean, it's 2 lattes at Starbucks. Number 2, we have an iPhone app now that people can download for making contact using the meditation techniques and what have you. And it's at the App Store. We're about to come out with an Android version right now we have dozens and dozens of contact teams all over the world that coordinate their efforts together. And it's really amazing because the contact, the kinds of events that have happened are stunning. And for people who really want to get deepened on this, I do about 4 or 5 times a year. We do these week-long retreats. In August, we're going to be up in Mount Shasta in California, although that event is almost full. I think there are a couple of spaces. And then in November, we're going to be in the desert of the southwestern United States in a very remote area, training people. And during the day, we train people in meditation, higher consciousness, and remote viewing. And at night, we go out every night till about 1 in the morning under the stars with a really amazing contact experiences. And when people come to these, they have no idea how much contact happens, how intimate it is, how immediate it is. And this is going to be one of the foci of this film that will be included in this film series on neverendinglight.com. So those are things that people can do if they really want to take a week and deepen very far into this. But if they can't take the time to do it, then, we do have an app and there are training materials on our website where they can learn to do it. Because if you understand Rupert Sheldrake's concept of the morphogenic fields, it's like the 100th monkey. The more that people do this, it causes a change in human consciousness that opens a new pathway to the future that's about peaceful contact, higher consciousness, new science and technology, and a whole world that's a transformed civilization. And that's what we have to come together as a people to do, because we really don't have any more. We don't have another century to waste like we did in the 20th century, where many of these things were forestalled. It's a new millennium, it's a new century. It's time for all this to happen in a very definitive fashion.
Absolutely. And you said one of my favorite lines that I always say on the show, we're going for the 100th monkey effect. When enough of us wake up and remember who we are, where we came from, and how powerful we really are, that is when the big shift of conscious will happen. And that's part of my mission with this radio show, the 100th monkey effect. So it's on, and there's so many people coming out, so many people awakening. I've had so many friends myself. It's just amazing, amazing times. And this is what the Mayans and the prophecies, the Hopis talked about. It's a shift of consciousness.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, before you go, if you could, just touch a little bit on what you have also found out about the Hopis and Mayans, since I just brought that up with ETs.
Well, every civilization has had contact, in my opinion, with these ET civilizations. And I think that there are many prophecies that deal with this time we're in. And it's misunderstood. This is not the end of the world. It's the end of one era. It's the end of a 450,000-year yuga, as they call it in Sanskrit, and the opening of a new cycle that is 500,000 years of unbroken peace, universal peace, and higher consciousness. And we are right at the cusp of the closing out of one whole era and the opening of another. And that's the real meaning behind the Hopi and the Mayan 2012 prophecies and many other prophecies around the world. And the exciting thing about it is that, my God, here we are on this planet at this time in history. It's a tumultuous time, but it's a time full of amazing potential, and that we should seize the potential to create the world of our dreams. And if we all come together and do it, it'll happen.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show and all the work you've been doing. You're just an amazing individual, and that's what happens when you come awaken to these higher truths. It's like when I first awakened myself 2 years ago and understood that we were these higher conscious, multidimensional beings from other galactic civilizations. To me, that was the most exciting news I've ever heard. I want to tell everybody.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't get any cooler than that. It was like, this is amazing. And once I had my experiences where I astro traveled and left my body consciously, I couldn't tell my own brain anymore that it wasn't truth. And that's
right.
All it takes is that one experience, that one contact, whatever it is. And that's it. You're off and running. You get that initial burst of light, that initial burst of remembrance of who we are and where we came from, and you are off and running. So
imagine doing that every night for a week under the stars with a whole lot of like-minded people. That's what these expeditions are that we do at Sea Steady. So it's really
amazing.
A lot of fun.
Well, I'm going to try myself to get out to one of those Dr. Greer and experience that for myself, because it's amazing.
Well, maybe we'll come to Asheville and do at least a long weekend or something.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. I'd love to help you organize that. So Again, thank you for coming on the show, and check out your websites and help get this movie out there. You can check out disclosureproject.org, theorionproject.org, and serious.neverendinglight.com. Dr. Greer, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
And here's some more Adam Apollo, and we'll be right back with a wrap-up